While he was ruthlessly confronting Dominic and Gwen Archer about the disappearance of Lily from the hospital, Kevin suddenly received a phone call from Adriana Wright. She frantically told him that Troy Evans and the others from the Vanguard who Kevin was keeping in the penthouse of Corwin Tower had had some kind of dispute with Riley Collins, and that they were currently holding him tied up and gagged. She further explained that Rachel had had some kind of falling out with her family about the matter. Putting the pieces of the puzzle together, Kevin decided that it was likely the Collins family that had taken Lily and Dorothy from the hospital as revenge for Kevin's men taking Riley, and that Rachel must have gotten into an argument with the rest of her family as she pleaded for mercy for her friend. Kevin left the Archer family's mansion and rushed with Dalton to the Collins family's mansion. After a bodyguard refused them entry to the house, Dalton slapped him hard across the face, attracting the attention of all the other bodyguards nearby, who rushed to the scene to confront Kevin and Dalton.
"I really want to see who dares to attack me today,"
Dalton said coldly as he suddenly took a step forward. He put his hands on his waist and showed no signs of fear.
"Who the hell are you?"
the man who had been hit said, feeling a little dizzy.
"I am Dalton Steele. Have you heard of me?"
Dalton said. His voice was as loud as a roar. The dozen or so bodyguards standing in front of Kevin and Dalton were shocked when they heard this. After all, they all had been living in Chicago. How many of them had never heard Dalton Steele's name? First, he had taken out Drake Cook, and then he had challenged Dominic Archer. He was the king of the underworld, and now he was standing right in front of them after being hit by one of their fold.
"I want to see the person in charge of the Collins family. Who calls the shots around here? Tell whoever it is to get the hell out of here right now. Otherwise, you bastards had better make way for me because I will go in and find him myself."
Dalton Steele shouted, instantly stunning everyone. Mr. Collins is not available today," the head bodyguard answered timidly. His tone was not arrogant like before, and he did not even have the confidence to speak any louder than a mere whisper. The number of people in Chicago who would dare to stand up and speak loudly in front of Dalton Steele could be counted on one hand.
"He won't even see me if I come to him?"
Dalton Steele said as his eyes widened, and he took 2 steps forward angrily. A dozen bodyguards did not dare to stop him. Instead, they quickly took 7 or 8 steps back. It could not be helped. As the saying goes, the shadow of a man's tree is the true measure of his power. Furthermore, Dalton Steele's name was synonymous with pure evil. "Dalton, don't waste time. Let's go in and find him," Kevin said. It was rare for Kevin to waste his time talking nonsense with underlings like these men. He walked straight toward the entrance of the Collins family mansion. But then, a strange scene appeared in front of them. Kevin and Dalton slowly walked forward, but more and more bodyguards of the Collins family gathered together and formed a human wall that quickly retreated as they advanced. When they were about to reach the main foyer, Robert Collins walked out. After looking around at all the bodyguards near the front door, he coldly looked at Kevin and Dalton.
"Who are you? How dare you come to my house and act this way?"
Robert Collins said as he put his hands behind his back and raised his head slightly. His words were filled with contempt and disdain. "The Collins family has come a long way, hasn't it?" Kevin said softly. His eyes were almost narrowed into slits and he clenched his fists tightly.
"And who are you? Have we met somewhere before?"
Robert asked. He couldn't help but look at Kevin for a long moment. He felt that Kevin looked familiar, but he couldn't recall where he had seen him before. "My name is Kevin Williams," Kevin directly introduced himself.
Kevin Williams?"
Robert said as he was stunned for a moment. Then he immediately reacted. The scorn on his face became even stronger.
"No wonder you look so familiar. So you are that useless relative of the Jones family. I know exactly who you are. Why did you suddenly think that you could come knocking on my door? This may come as bitter disappointment to you, but my family doesn't take care of trash like you." "You really don't know who you're messing with. Do you have a death wish or something?"
Dalton said as he gritted his teeth hard and took a long stride forward toward Robert Collins. When Robert, who was laughing loudly, heard this threat, his expression immediately turned ugly. Ever since the Collins family rose to power, no one would be so stupid as to be impolite to him. This young man actually dared to speak rudely to him?
"And who are you?"
Robert said with a snicker as he stared coldly at Dalton.
"I'm someone you shouldn't be looking at like that,"
Dalton said before adding,
"You foolish old man."
Before Robert could react, one of the bodyguards beside him whispered a few words into his ear. Robert Collins's expression immediately changed from one of anger to a small smile.
"So you are the young heir of the great Steele family. I've been looking forward to meeting you. Nice to meet you." "To be honest, I hadn't been looking forward to meeting you."
Dalton Steele crossed his arms in front of his chest and said coldly,
"My brother here has something important to talk to you about. You'd better settle it quickly. I don't have all day to spend talking to someone like you."
Robert Collins's face froze. He looked at Kevin in disbelief.
"I didn't see it before, Kevin. You are quite good at bootlicking. You've actually been able to build a friendship with young Mr. Steele here? That alone is more than I ever would have expected from someone like you,"
Robert said as he shook his head and sighed.
"But Mr. Steele, let me remind you that your family has a reputation to uphold. Don't be fooled by someone like this young man, or you will surely regret it."
The Collins family is certainly high and mighty now, aren't they? You really think you have the right to look down on anyone else? Kevin said. The coldness on his face had become so stark that it seemed like a layer of frost was about to form.
"Compared to trash like you, our family is indeed quite high and mighty. Don't think that just because my daughter has some kind of friendship with your wife, that gives you the right to be treated with any kind of respect. So I would suggest that you get the hell out of here. Don't make me get someone to throw you out. If that happens, I can assure you things will end very badly for both of you," Robert said. The more he spoke, the more impatient he became. Kevin did not speak again. Instead, he was thinking hard about something. From Robert Collins's tone and attitude, it seemed that he clearly did not know anything at all about his true identity. This also meant that the Collins family didn't know that he owned Corwin Tower, and therefore didn't know that Troy Evans and the others had any affiliation with him. As such, it was very unlikely that they had captured Lily as retribution for what Troy and the others had done to Riley Collins. Dalton looked at Robert as if he was looking at a fool. Currently, there were very few people in Chicago who didn't know Kevin's identity. The fact that this man didn't understand who he was talking to was downright baffling to Dalton. "Did you hear what I said? Hurry up and get the hell out of here. I don't have time to waste on trash like you,"
Robert said again, wagging his index finger in Kevin's face. He then looked at Dalton Steele and added,
"Why on earth is someone like you hanging around with this guy anyway?"
Everyone in the world knew how powerful the Steele family was. They had been operating in Chicago for many years. Although they had been severely suppressed by Drake Cook and Dominic Archer for a while, the family's power was on the rise again thanks to Dalton Steele, who had just returned. From this, it could be seen how powerful the Steele family really was. It was not something that the Collins family, which had only just risen to prominence recently in a very short period of time, could compare with. This was like the difference between old money and new money. Although both of them had money in their hands, when comparing the various resources at their disposal throughout society, those with old money had roots that ran much deeper. Robert Collins was a rich man, but compared with someone like Dalton Steele, who had connections all over the city, even he knew that he had something to gain from a relationship with someone so deeply rooted. At that moment, Rachel, who had heard that Kevin had arrived at the Collins family mansion, hurriedly ran out to greet him. She respectfully lowered her head slightly and said, "Hello, Mr. Williams." She wasn't the only one who had heard that someone had come to cause trouble. When everyone saw the way she greeted Kevin, they were dumbfounded.
"Rachel, are you all right? What did you just call him?" Robert asked.
Rachel looked at her father and then back at Kevin.
"How did this trash get mixed up with Dalton Steele anyway?
Robert asked her. Rachel was caught in a bind. She knew the truth, but she could never expose the past that had entwined her fate with that of Kevin's rise and his marriage to Lily. After Robert Collins mercilessly insulted Kevin, he finally ordered his bodyguards to step forward and rough him up. But before they could make a move, Rachel emerged from inside the house and urged her father to back down and leave Kevin alone. Robert refused, at which point Rachel told him that they needed Kevin to help get her brother Riley back from the penthouse of Corwin Tower, who was being held captive by Troy Evans and the others from the Vanguard. Robert misunderstood what Rachel was saying and assumed she meant that Kevin was the one responsible for kidnapping Riley as a means of extorting money from the Collins family, despite the fact that, unbeknownst to Robert, all of his wealth was solely thanks to Kevin in the first place. At that point, Kevin had become convinced that Robert had absolutely nothing to do with Lily's kidnapping, because otherwise he surely would have brought up that fact by now. Nevertheless, Kevin decided that he was going to teach Robert Collins a lesson regardless, and called Mitchell Cook to order him to deplete 40% of the Collins family's assets within the next 10 minutes. Just as Robert was convinced that he had nothing to worry about from this ridiculous threat, someone came rushing out of the house telling him that there was bad news about the family's finances. "Sir, it's not good. I don't know why, but the partnership between us and the Whistler Hotel has been indefinitely suspended. Also, I just received news that there are more than a dozen investors who have withdrawn all their investments and asked us for their funds back immediately. There are also several people who have started to snipe the shares from the Collins family. It looks like in just the past 10 minutes, our total assets may have fallen by as much as 40%, the man stammered. Hearing this, the growing crowd of bodyguards, family members, and family friends gathered in front of the Collins family mansion fell into complete silence. No one could believe what they had just heard. It was quiet enough to hear a pin drop. They all clearly remembered that Kevin had said that he would reduce their family's assets by 40% in 10 minutes, and that was apparently exactly what had just happened. Could he have been telling the truth? How could this possibly be just a coincidence? Robert Collins muttered, "How is this possible? What are those investors thinking? They won't be able to make money if they suddenly withdraw their investments. Did you send someone to contact the Whistler Hotel? Has there been some misunderstanding?" Robert Collins looked at the many red numbers on the tablet, and his body was trembling with anger. "We sent someone over to talk to Mitchell Cook, but Mr. Cook kicked him out of the building immediately. He didn't give any details about the situation at all," someone said. Many of the Collins family members were on the verge of tears. They had no idea what had just happened. Their entire world had been turned upside down in the span of just 10 minutes. "Well, Mr. Collins, what do you think now? Am I still just a joke to you? Or what was it you called me? Trash," Kevin said as he crossed his arms in front of his chest with a calm expression on his face. Did you do all of this? But how?" Robert Collins raised his head in disbelief and asked. Everyone looked at him as if they had just seen a ghost. Their faces were filled with shock and disbelief, and also a bit of fear. They really couldn't understand why or how Kevin suddenly had so much power that he was able to do something like this in just a few minutes and with just one phone call. If everything was just a coincidence, then wouldn't it be just too much of a coincidence? Rachel stood behind Kevin indifferently. She had already seen the faces of the people from her family clearly, and she was well aware that everything she had now was given to her by Kevin. It's funny, isn't it? How fragile wealth is. How quickly everything can disappear just like that, Kevin said as he slightly shook his head with a smile on his face. Seeing Robert Collins sputtering with confusion and rage was infinitely satisfying to Kevin. Robert Collins threw the tablet back at the person who had brought it outside to him. "Kevin, don't pretend to be all high and mighty here. It's just that you were lucky enough to figure out some way to screw over my family.
What did you do, hack our accounts or something? Although we have suffered a blow in terms of money, the reputation of the Collins family is still something that you will never come close to matching in your wildest dreams. Everyone, listen up. Get this piece of trash and break his legs before throwing him off my property. I don't want to see him back here ever again. And someone find out what happened to all my money, he added. Yes, sir, the bodyguards answered respectfully.
Rachel closed her eyes in disappointment. She was speechless about what her father had just said. How could he still be so stubborn after everything that had just happened? Just as the bodyguards were leaning forward and taking their first step toward Kevin, Rachel stood up before Kevin was forced to make a move. Dad, how long are you going to be so hard-headed? Do you know that if you attack Mr. Williams today, our entire family will really be finished? What's the matter with you? Rachel shouted loudly. Robert Collins simply ignored his daughter's warning. The confluence of events between Riley Collins' kidnapping and the shrinking of the family business made Robert Collins feel an overwhelming sense of anger in his heart. He wasn't thinking clearly about the consequences of his actions at this moment. He just wanted to find a way to vent all of his anger and frustration. The people of the Collins family who were standing nearby looked at Kevin with cold smiles on their faces. They had already made up their minds. Everything was just a coincidence. Or maybe Kevin had pulled some kind of trick on their family. He was probably some kind of criminal or hacker, as far as they were concerned. Regardless, they were still convinced that the person standing in front of them was just a lowlife. All of you, stop right there! Rachel shouted at the bodyguards, but none of them listened to her. Finally, she clenched her fists and shouted, Dad, listen carefully. Mr. Williams is the boss who has given me every opportunity. He is also the big shot you are all talking about all the time. He is the one who gave everything to our family. Stop! A voice shouted. Rachel's grandfather stepped forward and shouted at the bodyguards, then stared at Rachel. What did you just say? He asked slowly. Everyone else present, including Robert Collins, was stunned by this news. What did you say? This man is your boss? Rachel's grandfather's eyes widened to the point that they took up half of his face. Rachel only nodded at her grandfather a few times, turned around, and lowered her head to speak to Kevin. Mr. Williams, I'm sorry. This is all just a terrible misunderstanding. I just don't want them to hurt you. Don't worry about me. They won't hurt me. But you don't have to blame yourself. Kevin comforted her gently. No, it's impossible. Robert stammered as he finally came back to his senses and took a few steps backward. Robert Collins recalled his daughter's sudden rise not so long ago. She had become the general manager of Salix Leaf Hotel, and she also received the support of Mitchell Cook and many others. From then on, the Collins family status had risen by leaps and bounds. All along, Robert had thought that Rachel had been handpicked by some wealthy and powerful figure to run the Salix Leaf Hotel. That was why he had started to become so arrogant. But who would have thought that all of this would be given to them by Kevin Williams, the man who not too long ago was seen as a complete nobody who married into the Jones family? The reality in front of Robert Collins was completely different from everything that he had imagined. Rachel, are you joking? Her grandfather asked her quietly as he took a deep breath. Grandpa, would I joke about something like this? Mr. Williams isn't just my boss. He is also the CEO of the Williams Group and the benefactor of Mitchell Cook and many others. Rachel said without even turning her head. No, this can't be true. Robert stammered, still unwilling to accept what he was hearing. He was so angry that he couldn't even think straight. Suddenly, his eyes rolled to the back of his head and he fainted, falling to the ground with a hard thud. Immediately, several members of the Collins family surrounded him, checked his condition, and then picked him up to be carried into the house. Rachel's grandfather, George Collins, squinted his eyes as he looked at Kevin. It was only at this moment that he realized why this man had been able to stay so calm. It turned out that he was pretending to be a pig while he was really a tiger. After struggling slightly to get through the crowd of people in front of him, George Collins slowly walked up to Kevin. He lightly lowered his head and said with a flushed face, Mr. Williams, my son was blind earlier. I am sorry that he offended you. George Collins was not just extremely angry, but also deeply embarrassed at that moment. And he also knew faster than the other members of the family that Kevin's wealth and power meant that he was no one who should ever be disrespected, or otherwise there would be hell to pay. After Robert Collins emerged from inside the family's mansion, he approached Kevin and thought that he looked familiar. He realized that he had met him before and that he was the useless husband of his daughter Rachel's friend, Lily. Hurling a stream of insults at Kevin, Robert was shocked that someone like Kevin would dare to show up on his doorstep like this. Dalton Steele immediately leapt to Kevin's defense, at which point Robert expressed surprise that someone as powerful as Dalton Steele would even be associating with someone like Kevin. Kevin came to the realization that if Robert Collins didn't know his true identity, then he couldn't possibly know that Troy Evans and the others who were holding Riley Collins captive at Corwin Tower were in any way connected to him, and therefore the Collins family would have had no motivation to take Lily and Dorothy as revenge against him. Rachel suddenly emerged from the house and greeted Kevin respectfully, causing Robert to be deeply confused. Robert only came back to his senses after a long moment of silence. He took a deep breath and said,
Rachel, what are you doing? Why would you talk to him like that?
But no matter what he said, Rachel acted as if she did not hear anything and stood dutifully in front of Kevin. Mr. Williams, I'm so sorry. They do not know your true identity, Rachel said in a hesitant voice. At the same time, she understood one thing. The Collins family was on very thin ice, whether they knew it or not. So your father doesn't know who I am. That's perfectly fine. But could it be that he treats other people the same way? If he is so arrogant just because he recently acquired some power, it would serve him well to know that there is always someone stronger than you in this world, Kevin said as he spoke to Rachel but looked directly into her father's eyes. He clenched his fist tightly as if he was ready to launch an attack at any moment. Rachel felt like screaming at the top of her lungs. She slowly turned her head and looked at her father and the bodyguards that had gathered around him.
You think you can do anything you want just because you're friends with Dalton Steele? You, Kevin, are just a man who relies on his wife to make a living. Do you think you are qualified to teach us a lesson? Robert said with a sneer. If it wasn't for Mr. Steele here, you could have died here today.
Originally, Riley Collins' incident had put the entire Collins family in a bad mood. Now Kevin, whom they had always looked down upon, had come to provoke them for seemingly no reason whatsoever. How could Robert Collins let this slide? But in fact, Robert couldn't be entirely blamed for this situation. During this very short period of time, the Collins family's strength expanded very quickly. Trying to keep up with his own growing power, he simply didn't have the time to understand everything that was going on around him. Ultimately, he was somewhat isolated from the news. He didn't know what Kevin had done in Chicago during this period of time.
Don't say that. You don't have to consider my presence at all. Let me see how you are going to deal with Kevin,
Dalton said as he crossed his arms in front of his chest. After saying this, he turned around and walked off to the side, seemingly giving Kevin a wide berth.
All right, since Mr. Steele says so, I won't be so accommodating to this trash anymore, Robert said as he clapped his hands hard. Everyone listen to me. Throw this trash out immediately. If he dares to resist, you can break his hands and feet.
Yes, sir, the group of bodyguards answered. All of them rubbed their fists and prepared to do Robert Collins' dirty work for him. Stop! Let's see which of you dares to move another muscle, Rachel suddenly berated them. Her face was serious as she added, Don't forget who your boss is. When her voice fell, the group of bodyguards all stopped moving immediately. Although they were hired by the Collins family, almost all of the financial power of the family came from Rachel alone, And this was no secret among the bodyguards. In the end, Rachel was the one with the most authority in the Collins family.
Rachel, are you really going to do this today? Are you still a member of the Collins family or not? This trash showed up uninvited with the sole purpose of trying to provoke me. If I don't teach him a lesson, we'll be a laughingstock. Who will take our family seriously in the future?
Robert said as he stared at his daughter with a stern expression. The fury in his heart had reached its peak. The Collins family had a more traditional way of thinking. Men still retained the majority of the power within the family. If Rachel had not been handpicked by some mysterious big shot, she would have never received nearly as much respect from her father as her brother enjoyed. The only reason why that wasn't the case is because Robert knew that his own wealth and power depended on his daughter. This was also the reason why Robert Collins was so arrogant. With a mysterious big shot supporting their family, what was there to be afraid of? Dad, I'm doing this for the sake of the Collins family. Don't you want my brother to come back alive? Do you really think that you can successfully rescue Riley just by hiring people with our money? Rachel was not afraid at all as she coldly reprimanded her father.
What are you talking about? What does Riley's situation have to do with Kevin?
Robert asked as he slowly stepped forward.
What the?
Robert suddenly uttered as his facial expression suddenly changed, and a fierce look appeared on his face.
Good God, Kevin. You have really grown up. Without the Jones family to keep you in line, have you completely gone off the rails, haven't you? How dare you take the risk of kidnapping and extortion? Are you that desperate for money? Hurry up and return my son right away.
All of a sudden, the way the Collins family's bodyguards looked at Kevin changed from disgust and disdain to pure hatred. I didn't expect you to have such a sharp tongue at your age, Kevin retorted as he shrugged his shoulders indifferently. Now he was basically certain that Lily's situation had absolutely nothing to do with Robert Collins. Otherwise, he would have used Lily to threaten him a long time ago.
Kevin, I'm talking to you. Do you hear me? Hurry up and return my son to me, or else I will call the police.
Robert roared as he gritted his teeth. Your son has nothing to do with me, Kevin replied indifferently. Originally, I came here for another matter. No matter how much I dislike the attitude of you and the rest of your family, I have decided to do something. Hearing this, the bodyguards couldn't help but laugh at him. They looked at him like he was a complete fool again.
Did I hear you correctly? This stray dog doesn't like my attitude? Who do you think you are?
Robert said. All of the bodyguards assembled around him chuckled. Only Rachel's face suddenly turned pale. She really wanted to slap these idiots for being so disrespectful. To take advantage of all the benefits she had brought them through Kevin and then to mock him to his face relentlessly. It was irony to the fullest level. Mr. Williams, Rachel shouted as she turned her head and looked again at Kevin with a desperate begging look. Don't worry, it's just a small punishment. It won't cause too much trouble, Kevin said as he took 2 steps forward and took out his phone to call Mitchell Cook. 10 minutes. The total assets of the Collins family are to be reduced by 40%. Kevin gave a simple instruction and hung up the phone.
Oh, good one. What? Are we playing make-believe now? Who do you think you are, Almighty God? Reducing my family's assets in 10 minutes. Do you believe that I won't kill you in 10 minutes? Robert said. He was laughing so hard that he was holding his stomach. All of his bodyguards joined in the laughing and jeering. But when Robert took a look at Kevin, he suddenly stopped, and a serious expression appeared on his face. For some reason, when he saw the confident smile on Kevin's face, he suddenly had a bad feeling in the pit of his stomach. Time seemed to pass very quickly. 10 minutes had passed in the blink of an eye. Still, Robert had convinced himself that there was nothing to worry about. Kevin, how long are you going to keep this up? Let me tell you the truth. If it wasn't for Mr. Steele, you wouldn't even be standing here right now. How dare you treat me this way? He pointed toward the gate with his right hand and said slowly, Considering the friendship between the Collins family and the Jones family, get out of here right now and I'll spare your life. Did you really just say that?
Don't come and beg me to spare your life later, Kevin replied unhurriedly. Currently, unbeknownst to Robert Collins, everything that the Collins family possessed was basically given to them by him. Since Kevin was able to support them with one hand, he would naturally be able to pull the rug out from under Robert with the other. In all honesty, Kevin could replace Rachel in a minute and still keep the same level of business success. He didn't want to hurt Rachel, at least not anymore, but he and she knew that she was not crucial to the rise of the Whistler Hotel.
How dare you?
Robert started to say. But before he could finish his sentence, someone stumbled out from inside the house.
Sir, Mr. Collins, it's not good, sir.
After falling to the ground, he immediately got up and handed a tablet to him.
It can't just be a coincidence, could it?
Robert said, instantly frowning.
What's going on here? What's happening?
Robert said in a panic as he looked at all the red numbers on the screen in front of him in confusion. Robert's fortunes were falling faster than a roller coaster. Even after all of the evidence had been presented to him, Robert Collins still refused to believe that Kevin was in such a position of power to accomplish what had just been done to his family's finances. He remained convinced that it was just a coincidence, or at best that Kevin was some sort of criminal or con artist who had managed to trick him or hack into his accounts. Robert ordered his bodyguards to rough up Kevin and kick him off his property, at which point Rachel finally stepped forward and informed her father and everyone else present that Kevin was, in fact, her boss, and that he was the one responsible for all of the Collins family's wealth. Robert was so shocked that he fainted and had to be carried back inside the house. Rachel's grandfather, George Collins, was also surprised as he slowly walked forward toward Kevin and apologized for his son's actions. Looking at the old man in front of him, Kevin could not help but let out a slight sigh. Mr. Collins, it's not your fault. You don't have to apologize for your son. He is just a stubborn man. I have decided that I am only inflicting a small punishment this time. After we leave here, you can ask Rachel to get in touch with Mitchell Cook to sort everything out in relation to your finances. As for your grandson, Riley, I will get in touch with my people and ask someone to send him back to you right away. He stopped for a moment before adding, You should know that your granddaughter, Rachel, is very smart and capable. I would never give up on her no matter who her family is. I only hope that some of the more stubborn members of the Collins family do not hold her back too much in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Williams,
George Collins replied with a face full of gratitude, as if he had just been granted amnesty from a death sentence. At the same time, Kevin's magnanimity made George Collins feel slightly ashamed. Even after all the hatred that Kevin had just endured at the hands of his son, Kevin was able to turn the other cheek like this after just a few minutes. George wondered how he had not been able to recognize that Kevin was so much more than his son had assumed. Kevin wasn't just rich and powerful, George sensed. He was also a great man. After stopping Rachel from seeing him off, Kevin quickly left the Collins family mansion with Dalton. A moment later, Spencer made a phone call. He asked him to arrange for someone to go to Corwin Tower and talk to Troy Evans and the others, and to send Riley back to his family. Still, the most urgent matter on Kevin's mind right now was to find out about Lily as soon as possible, so he was eager to turn his attention back to that matter. Who could it be? Kevin said as he took a deep breath of smoke and leaned against a wall. His eyes were full of doubt. In Chicago, he really could not think of anyone who would dare to attack his men, let alone kidnap his comatose wife from a hospital bed.
Kevin, what do you want to do? Where can we look next?
Dalton said as he squatted beside him and also took a big puff of smoke. After leaving the Riley family's mansion, they had already visited 6 or 7 other potential suspects. Kevin and Dalton had put the fear of God into each and every one of them, but none of them cracked. There was no doubt in either of their minds that none of them had anything to do with Lily's disappearance. Anyone with even the slightest connection to the kidnapping wouldn't be able to stand up to the terror exerted by Dalton and Kevin. Despite their best efforts, They still couldn't find any trace of Lily. Of course, I have to keep looking for her. Even if I have to turn all of Chicago upside down, I will do whatever I have to do to find her, Kevin forcefully said with a determined look in his eyes as he snuffed out the cigarette butt.
But we have no idea what to do next. What should we do next? Don't tell me you just want to trample over every single wealthy and powerful family in Chicago, hoping someone will admit that he kidnapped Lily,
Dalton asked with some difficulty. If Kevin really wanted to go to such lengths, then this search would last far too long. He had to think more creatively if he wanted to find Lily before it was too late.
Kevin, do you think it could have been done by someone outside of Chicago?
Dalton seemed to have thought of something.
Could it have been the Morris family?
He hesitatingly asked. Kevin's eyes lit up when he heard this. Let's go to the Healing Arts School, he said. In fact, Kevin had never really considered the possibility. In his mind, Calvin Morris was currently recuperating and not up to undertaking a fiendish plot like kidnapping Lily. Besides, the Morris family was far away in Washington, D.C., and they weren't known for meddling in Chicago. In the dean's office of the Healing Arts School, Wayne Ford was reading a document in his hands.
Herman Thompson is heading back east to D.C. He's been talking to Scott Whitney and he wants to protect Kevin.
Harley Shepard rubbed his forehead and said tiredly,
Our people also followed him secretly to protect Herman. This time the kid really put a hole in the sky. Even Herman, who has never cared about this sort of thing, has come to the surface.
Wayne Ford slowly put down the list in his hand. His brows were almost knitted together.
Is there still no word from the Herbalist Society?
No. They've been unusually quiet, Harley Shepard said as he shook his head lightly. The office fell silent. The main problem was they could not find Kevin, so they could not discuss the specifics with him. Suddenly, the door was pushed open from the outside. Kevin and Dalton walked in quickly. I have something to ask you, Kevin said bluntly. When Wayne Ford and Harley Shepard saw them, they both stood up from their chairs almost at the same time and stared at Kevin with wide eyes. It was luck that Kevin had walked into their office just as they were trying to figure out how to find him. Why are you two looking at me like that? Kevin asked. He suddenly had a bad feeling in the pit of his stomach.
You haven't heard the news?
Looking at the clueless Kevin, Harley Shepard hesitated for a moment before speaking. What's wrong? Kevin said, looking back and forth between the two of them while he shrugged his shoulders, then said, I'm here to ask you guys if any major power has made any moves into Chicago recently.
Do you really have time to care about such things? Don't you know that you have gotten yourself into big trouble?
Wayne Ford scolded him angrily. Wait a minute. We clearly have something to talk about, but we have to take it one thing at a time. My matter is more urgent, I can assure you, so let me speak first, Kevin said as he waved his hands and said with a serious face, My wife was taken from the hospital by someone and I don't know who's responsible. I need your help investigating it. Wayne Ford and Harley Shepard looked at each other when they heard him. They could see the shock in each other's eyes.
This can also be considered an emergency.
Harley Shepard smacked his lips a few times and said, As much of an emergency as my wife being kidnapped? Kevin shot back with more than a bit of irritation. Wayne Ford closed his eyes, his chest heaving up and down for a moment.
Let me tell you our news now, he said. The Morris family is moving forward with their allegations that you colluded with the Pinnacle in the battle on the island. In the battle against Divine Land, you colluded with the members of the Pinnacle, then even hid their young generation. Their evil intentions are obvious.
Wayne Ford stepped forward and said,
The Reaper Squad, Scott Whitney and Herman Thompson, who hasn't even stepped foot outside of St. Louis in decades, have all gone to Washington, D.C. to serve on a tribunal. If it wasn't for them, they would have captured you a long time ago already. Do you understand? So now that you're aware that your house is on fire, Can you appreciate the urgency of the situation?"
Wayne Ford asked as he clenched his fist tightly. "What the hell is this?" Kevin blinked a few times and asked, somewhat unable to react. Harley Shepard could only sigh and sit down in his chair again.
"What the hell? The Morris family can't get away with this. They clearly just want to target Kevin out of spite. This is completely ridiculous,"
Dalton shouted. The atmosphere in the office was especially solemn. Kevin sat in a chair and stared at the floor in silence. "Nevertheless, it turns out that what you've just told me is not as serious or as urgent as my wife's well-being," Kevin said. His words were not shocking to anyone. He continued, "I am asking you and all of the resources at the disposal of the Healing Art School to help me investigate Lily's situation and bring her home safe and sound. As for the Morris family, I will settle the score with them when I get to them." Wayne Ford's face darkened once again as he let out a long sigh. Everyone at the Healing Art School had been on pins and needles about the Morris family, but the person most affected by it was still able to stay so calm. In Kevin's mind, Lily's safety was all that mattered right now, and any conversation that didn't concern finding her was wasted time. After leaving the Collins family's mansion, Kevin and Dalton immediately visited 6 or 7 other potential suspects, but they left without having made any progress in their efforts to find Lily's kidnapper. Dalton suggested that the culprit could be someone from beyond the city of Chicago, specifically the Morris family. A suggestion that was like a light bulb turning on in Kevin's mind. After coming to this realization, they immediately went straight to the Healing Arts School, where Kevin intended to demand the help of Wayne Ford and Harley Shepard in finding his wife and bringing her home. After coming to this realization, they immediately went straight to the Healing Arts School, where Kevin intended to demand the help of Wayne Ford and Harley Shepard in finding his wife and bringing her home safely. But when they got there, Wayne and Harley informed him that the Morris family was moving forward with their efforts to frame Kevin for colluding with the Pinnacle during the battle on the island, and that a tribunal was assembling in Washington, D.C. to decide the matter. Nevertheless, Kevin calmly informed them that he would deal with the Morris family when the time came, and that right now, nothing was more important than finding Lily and bringing her home safely. As such, Wayne Ford and Harley Shepard were at a loss for what to do next. If it wasn't for the fact that he was afraid of the Night King, Wayne Ford would have put Kevin in his place a long time ago. He was stunned that Kevin did not appreciate the gravity of the situation he now found himself in with the Morris family. Kevin's phone suddenly rang, which jolted everyone's nerves at this tense moment. An unknown number was displayed on the screen. Kevin narrowed his eyes, hesitating about whether to answer it or not. In the end, he chose to answer the call.
"Kevin, I heard that you have been looking for your wife all over Chicago,"
a voice said from the other end of the phone. The person's tone was somehow both flat and filled with emotion. "Who are you? How dare you bring up my wife?" Kevin asked coldly. "I don't have time to talk nonsense with you."
"Oh, don't worry. I think we can have a good chat.
For example, we can discuss how we can help you get through the trouble you're facing with the Morris family, and how we can help you find Lily and your mother-in-law," the man said. His tone remained calm and even, as if he didn't take Kevin's provocation seriously. However, the 3 people gathered around Kevin in the office, who were all listening in on the call on speakerphone, let frowns spread across their faces. Harley Shepard and Wayne Ford were amazed by the first half of this man's words. Could it be that there were still people who were willing to help others resist the pressure of the Morris family? The Morris family's power had increased to the point that it seemed to be insurmountable. Kevin and Dalton, on the other hand, paid more attention to the other half of this man's words. They had searched almost every corner of Chicago, but they still didn't even have so much as a lead on Lily's whereabouts. Could this mysterious person really help them find her? Was the caller the one responsible, or was he really someone who was trying to help? Why should I believe you? Kevin asked forcefully. He wasn't willing to let this man think that he had been born yesterday.
It's up to you whether you believe me or not. But if you want to talk, meet me at the location being sent to your phone now. It's in the western suburbs of Chicago. Meet me at 6 o'clock this evening. I will wait for you at the bus stop at the location I've sent you. It's number 167, the man said.
The man hung up as soon as he finished speaking. Wayne Ford immediately stood up when the call ended.
This is complete nonsense. No matter how you look at it, it's got to be a trap. Kevin, you can't go meet this person. It's way too risky.
Wayne Ford warned him seriously. Let's not even talk about whether he really knows the whereabouts of your wife. Just think about what he said. Think about how powerful the Morris family is. How can he go up against them? There's no sane person who could possibly make such a promise. It doesn't make any sense. Harley Shepard patted Kevin's shoulder and said, Think rationally, Kevin. Don't fall for some evil scheme. There are other ways to find Lily. We just need to be a little bit patient. Dalton Steele didn't say anything, but he kept staring at Kevin. He had made his stance clear. Kevin slowly put away his phone and shook his head a few times. Do you know why I don't care about what you guys are talking about? This question seemed a bit bold, and neither Wayne Ford nor Harley Shepard knew how to respond. They could only look at him quietly and wait for him to continue. As a husband, I owe Lily so much. If I can't even protect her, what's the point of even waking up tomorrow morning? This is something I have to do. I don't have a choice. Kevin said as he slowly stood up and surveyed Dalton and the others with no expression on his face. This time, I don't need anyone else to help me. I don't want you to come with me. I have to solve this myself, he added. After finishing this sentence, Kevin turned around and left the office, clearly not intending to let anyone follow him. It was only 2 o'clock. Kevin still had 4 hours to kill before 6 o'clock, so he didn't rush right over to the location where the man demanded to meet him. Instead, he went to the hospital. Alan and Susan Williams had already been brought back by the Swinton family, but Emo Squire was still in the hospital. Kevin felt it was only right for him to stop in to check on him. Mr. Williams! Seeing Kevin enter the room, Gilbert Rhodes quickly put down the half-peeled orange in his hand. Emo Squire struggled to get up, but Kevin calmly waved his hand to indicate Emo shouldn't strain himself to rise from the bed. Gilbert, can you give us a moment? I have something to talk about with Emo privately, Kevin said, his expression somewhat serious. Okay, no problem, Gilbert immediately replied. He did not ask any more questions. Before he left, he turned around and gave Emo a deep look. Then he quickly walked out of the room and closed the door. Mr. Williams, Emo said as he leaned against the pillow and lowered his head slightly out of respect. Kevin couldn't help but notice that his eyes seemed to be a bit confused. You don't have to do this. There is no one else around. Tell me, who did this to you? Kevin said as he casually pulled a chair over and sat down. He even poured him a cup of water. Emo bit his lips tightly and became silent. Was it someone close to us? Mitchell Cook? Kevin asked as he calmly placed the water on the table beside the bed. Upon hearing Mitchell's name, Emo suddenly raised his head, his face full of shock. Seeing you react like this proves that I didn't guess wrong, Kevin said very naturally. But how did you guess? Emo asked in disbelief. It was precisely because his injuries were related to Mitchell Cook that Emo Squire had been so tight-lipped ever since he had regained consciousness. He couldn't even bring himself to believe the truth, much less tell anyone else about it. Mitchell Cook had always treated him as a younger brother. Emo Squire really didn't believe that Mitchell could have it in him to kill him. Actually, I don't think it's that hard to figure out. Even when Dominic Archer was almost about to die, he still said that it had nothing to do with him. I don't believe that a person can lie like that when death is so near. Also, after your incident, although I left Chicago very quickly, I was surprised by all the things that happened during that period of time. From the very beginning, Mitchell Cook never said a word. And there's one more thing. After you woke up, you had this kind of reaction. That proves that the murderer is someone close to us. You don't want to tell the truth because a part of you doesn't want the guilty person to suffer the consequences. That's why I thought of Mitchell Cook first, Kevin said as he bent down slightly and put his hands on his knees. He asked seriously, "So, tell me in detail, what happened between you two?" Despite how calm Kevin was, a huge wave of emotion was stirred in the depths of his heart. Mitchell Cook attacking Emo Squire was something that he didn't even dare to think about before. "Actually, nothing happened. Although the person who attacked me was related to Mr. Cook, it wasn't him," Emo said as he tightly gripped the blanket, gritted his teeth, and added, "It was Drake Cook and his men who did it." "Drake Cook?" Kevin frowned. At that moment, the sunlight broke through the thick, dark clouds and shone through the window into the hospital room. But it could not lighten the doubt in Kevin's heart. Didn't he leave Chicago? Why would he still be attacking you? Kevin asked in confusion. "I don't know either." Kevin and Emo talked for half an hour before Gilbert Rhodes was called into the room. When he got there, he heard Emo Squire saying in a trembling voice, "Please, actually, this matter might not have much to do with him at all. Please don't hurt him." When Emo Squire said this, his voice kept trembling. It was enough to show how deep the pain in his heart truly was. With some time to kill before going to meet the mysterious person who had called him earlier when he was meeting with Wayne Ford and Harley Shepard at the Healing Arts School, who had claimed to have some information about Lily's whereabouts, Kevin decided to go to the hospital to visit Emo Squire. When he arrived, he asked Emo if Mitchell Cook had been involved in his attack, and Emo's reaction made it immediately clear to Kevin that the answer to this question was yes. However, Emo immediately broke down and clarified that the person directly responsible was actually Drake Cook, which confused Kevin because he had been led to believe that Drake Cook had already left Chicago for good. Kevin and Emo continued to talk for a half hour before Kevin called Gilbert Rhodes into the room, who upon entering heard Emo pleading with Kevin not to hurt the person they had just been talking about before Gilbert walked in. "Okay, I promise," Kevin said as he nodded twice and took a deep breath before walking past Gilbert and leaving the hospital room. At the Whistler Hotel, Mitchell Cook looked at the news on his phone, his chest heaving up and down.
"Bastard. He really has the audacity to deceive me?"
Mitchell Cook said as he forcefully slapped the table. "Sir, the latest news is that all the people we arranged to be there have been killed." A man stood up straight in the middle of the office and said with a serious expression on his face.
"Does Kevin know about this?"
Mitchell asked worriedly. 2 hours ago he went to the hospital." The man hesitated for a moment before he continued. "But he probably won't say anything. After all, he hasn't told anyone since he woke up."
"That's because you don't know him,"
Mitchell started to say. But before he had finished speaking, the office door was pushed open. Kevin walked in with a blank expression on his face and with his hands in his pockets.
"Mr. Williams,"
Mitchell Cook said as he quickly got up from his chair and greeted him respectfully. "Am I interrupting something?" Kevin asked as he glanced at the man standing off to the side.
No.
Mitchell Cook waved his hand, signaling for his subordinate to leave the office.
"What brings you here?"
Mitchell asked as he signaled for Kevin to sit down on the sofa, taking out a cigar for him and sitting down across from him. Kevin sat on the sofa, staring at the patterns on the coffee table while maintaining a stern expression that wouldn't give anything away to Mitchell. It was strange that this was the first time he had spoken to Mitchell Cook in such a way. He had many doubts in his heart, and he was very angry, but when he turned to face Mitchell Cook, he didn't know what to say next. He had so many thoughts racing through his mind, from Emo's attack to the Morris family's attempts to take him down, and especially his wife's kidnapping.
"Mr. Williams, do you need something from me? What brings you here today?"
Mitchell asked. He also noticed that the atmosphere in the room was off. Mitchell's hand movement slowed down by half a beat, and his forehead was now furrowed and beaded with a cold sweat. In fact, Mitchell was very nervous. One should know that the current Kevin Williams was not comparable to the Kevin Williams of the past 3 years. He had gone from a nobody to, in the blink of an eye, an extremely powerful man. Mitchell Cook was aware of this fact as much as anyone. "How long have we known each other, Mr. Cook?" Kevin asked as he sighed slightly, his eyes full of complex emotions.
"Many years have passed, sir. If it weren't for your help, I wouldn't be where I am now,"
Mitchell said as he squinted his eyes as if in pain, but it was so far only mental torment that Mitchell was feeling. The racing in his heart was getting worse and worse. He knew that he was in big trouble. "Time flies. So many years have passed in the blink of an eye. I finally have a chance to give something back," Kevin replied as he took the cigar that Mitchell Cook had given him and lit it, taking a few puffs before exhaling slowly and leaning back on the sofa.
"So, what exactly are you trying to say?"
Mitchell asked. He could not quite understand what Kevin was getting at, but he had the distinct impression that Kevin had not come here for a friendly visit. "I think time is a very interesting thing, don't you think? It can make simple hearts become complicated. It can also make a seemingly unbreakable relationship break into pieces and scatter everywhere," Kevin said slowly as he looked at the burning cigar in his hand, seemingly unconcerned with anything else in the world. "Don't you think so, Mr. Cook? Some people do change quite a bit with the passage of time," Kevin added as he took another puff of his cigar. Mitchell Cook's face became red, and the beads of sweat that had appeared on his forehead began to drip down his face. Mitchell Cook was not just any ordinary person. He was someone with an extraordinary amount of power all across Chicago. Not too long ago, who would have ever thought that he would ever find himself in a situation like this, just because of a simple statement by Kevin Williams?
"Mr. Williams, please tell me what's bothering you,"
Mitchell said nervously, having already vaguely guessed what Kevin was getting at. The anticipation was killing him. "Well, since you want to know so badly, I will tell you the truth," Kevin said as he put the cigar in the ashtray on the coffee table in front of him. "I think you already know about Emo Squire. He has been in the hospital for quite a while now. I want to ask you who the murderer is. I heard that after his accident you did not go to see him once. Are you not worried about him? What are you hiding from? Or is there some other reason that you would like to share with me?" Kevin asked, looking coldly at Mitchell Cook in his eyes. Mitchell's heart sank when he heard what Kevin said. The situation that he least wanted to see had finally come to fruition. Still, Kevin was not in a hurry to push him. He leaned back on the sofa again and quietly watched him while he waited for his next words.
"I am thinking that something happened to Emo. Gilbert Rhodes and Adriana Wright will definitely take care of him. But first of all, you were not in Chicago, so I didn't go to the hospital. I thought it would be best if I stayed back and watched the overall situation, in case there was anything to learn from afar," Mitchell replied without even raising his head. He was trying to think fast, but the words were tumbling out in a way that surely wouldn't convince Kevin of his innocence. "Oh, is that so? Then, Mr. Cook, what did you find out?" Kevin said as he raised his eyebrows expectantly and watched Mitchell fidget nervously. Not much yet, but
Mitchell stammered as he shook his head a few times and kept his eyes focused on the coffee table in front of him, refusing to meet Kevin's gaze. "Then allow me to enlighten you. I can tell you with certainty that the person who attacked Emo was Drake Cook." Kevin gently patted the back of his hand and said slowly, "Although I don't know if this has anything to do with you, Mr. Cook, you have to give me an explanation. Or at the very least, I need you to take on this matter personally, find him, and bring him to me. And remember, I want Drake Cook alive." After saying this, Kevin slowly got up. He patted his shoulder a few times and left the office without looking back. The moment Kevin closed the door behind him, Mitchell Cook collapsed in a limp pile of bones and muscle. He gasped for breath while knowing that he had come close to an even worse fate than now awaited him. Although Kevin did not show any anger before, the more he was in such a state, the more pressure he put on Mitchell Cook. After leaving the Whistler Hotel, Kevin made another trip to Corwin Tower and talked with Troy Evans and the others. Finally, he brought Jordan Black and Justin Black to the place mentioned on the phone. In the office of the Healing Arts School, Harley Shepard and Wayne Ford stood respectfully. On the sofa sat a white-haired old man. Although his face was covered with wrinkles, his eyes were as clear as a bottomless pool of water. If Kevin were here, he would be surprised to see this old man.
"Sir, may I ask why you are here?"
Wayne Ford asked cautiously. "What's the matter? Can't I come here if I have nothing else to do?" The Night King glanced at him and scolded him.
No,
Wayne Ford waved his hand. "You don't have to hide anything from me. I have already heard about Kevin and the Morris family. Don't worry, someone will come to find you before 6 p.m. tomorrow. You just need to follow them," the Night King said unhurriedly as he fiddled with the mug on the coffee table in front of him. "There's no need to take this matter too seriously. It's nothing that can't be easily solved in the grand scheme of things. If the Morris family doesn't let go of this matter, I don't mind having a chat with that old man," the Night King added with a gleam in his eye that Harley and Wayne knew meant actions would follow words. Kevin had gone to confront Mitchell Cook at the Whistler Hotel where, after a very tense exchange, he informed Mitchell that he knew Drake Cook was the one responsible for attacking Emo Squire. Kevin told him that he demanded an explanation and that he expected Mitchell Cook to personally find Drake and bring him back to face him alive. Meanwhile, at the Healing Arts School, Wayne Ford and Harley Shepard had been paid a visit by the Night King, who informed them that he was already aware of the Morris family's attempt to frame Kevin by claiming he colluded with the Vanguard during the battle against the Pinnacle on the island. The Night King informed Wayne and Harley that, in his mind, the matter was really nothing to worry about, and that he was more than happy to have a chat to settle things with the Morris family if it came to that. Wayne Ford and Harley Shepard were stunned when they heard this. Although the Night King's explanation of what he was willing to do came off as arrogant, given the Night King's strength, there was no doubt in either of their minds that he had every right to be confident about his negotiation skills. In any case, Wayne and Harley knew that Kevin finally had a reliable way to deal with the problem. The Night King said slowly, "I have something urgent to tell the two of you. An ancient tomb has been discovered in the Rocky Mountains. The Myriads, the Alliance, and many others are already aware of its discovery and have begun to make their moves upon hearing the news. You should also begin to make preparations as soon as possible." The Night King was like a wise elder, casually giving orders to the two of them.
"Yes, sir,"
Wayne Ford said as he nodded respectfully while drinking on the Night King's advice. However, Harley Shepard, who was standing beside him, frowned slightly. The discovery of an ancient tomb had attracted the attention of so many major powers, but the Healing Arts School had not received a single notice of the momentous discovery. He did not need to investigate to know that someone was intentionally obstructing the news from reaching the Healing Arts School. Otherwise, they surely would have heard about this already. At that moment, there was a knock on the door. Wayne Ford and Harley Shepard both looked over at the same time and made their way to the door. But the moment they turned their heads back to the center of the room, the Night King had disappeared. The window not far from where he had been sitting was open, and the wind blew the curtains gently. "Well, that was fast," Harley Shepard muttered as he looked at the open window in surprise. It was almost as if the Night King had disappeared into thin air. Soon, it was 6 o'clock in the evening. The bus stop where Kevin had been instructed to meet the mysterious man was deserted. But not far from the bus stop was an old picnic table in the middle of a small grassy park. A man was sitting at the table and drinking coffee out of a paper cup. The man seemed to be waiting for something, but Kevin saw no clues as to what that might be, except for another coffee cup sitting on the picnic table across from him. But no one else was there. Had someone just left? Or was the cup of coffee waiting for the man's guest, meaning Kevin? A gentle breeze blew under the setting sun as Kevin walked toward the figure. "It seems like you've been waiting for me for quite a while," Kevin said as he sat down on the chair slowly and crossed his legs leisurely. Jordan and Justin Black sat down on either side of him, staring at the man tensely.
"I knew you would come, so I have indeed been waiting for you here for quite a long time,"
the man replied calmly as he slowly put down the coffee cup in his hand and didn't even look up. "Why were you so sure that I would come?" Kevin asked as he raised his eyebrows and looked at the man, trying to get a read on him. He was sure that he did not know the man sitting across from him. At the same time, what surprised him even more was that he did not sense any kind of energy emanating from the man. He was a void. There were only two possibilities that could possibly explain such a situation. Either the man in front of him was an unfathomably advanced expert, or he was just an ordinary person. However, Kevin would never in a million years believe that this man was just an ordinary person. Just by looking at the calluses on his hand, he could tell that this man spent a lot of time wielding a sword.
"Since you're here anyway, why do you insist on asking so many questions? Isn't it better to just listen to what I have to say?"
The man slowly raised his head and said with a smile,
"Let me introduce myself first. My name is Ben Dumas, and I have come here from the headquarters of the Herbalist Society in Washington, D.C.
Kevin's pupils suddenly contracted when he heard this. He narrowed his eyes and looked more closely at the man sitting in front of him. So the Herbalist Society has finally surfaced, Kevin thought to himself as he pursed his lips slightly and carefully thought over the implications of this news. However, he still pretended to be calm and collected. "The Herbalist Society? I don't seem to have much of a relationship with you guys," he said.
"Haha, you certainly are one for jokes, aren't you? You have the power pill refining method in your possession. I know that Nadia Alexander was urged to bring all of the members of the Herbalist Society's Midwest branch to the Radiance. And you claim that this is still considered to be not much of a relationship with the Herbalist Society?"
Ben Dumas said as the smile on his face gradually faded. He then added,
"However, it is true that the Herbalist Society has never caused you any trouble, especially given where you and the Radiant stand. Mr. Williams, surely you would agree with this, right?"
"So you kidnapped my wife and my mother-in-law?" Kevin said, his tone suddenly turning cold. "Is that what you're getting at?" The originally calm atmosphere became tense when Kevin's voice fell.
"The Herbalist Society never needs to explain anything to anyone, no matter what you may think. I am giving you a chance to negotiate, as long as you hand over the Power Pill formula, and after serving the Herbalist Society for 20 years, we can write off everything between us."
Ben spoke calmly, pausing mid-sentence to take a sip of his coffee as if he was talking about the weather, still not looking Kevin in the eyes.
"After drinking this cup of coffee, we will be one and the same from this point forward. Even if the Morris family wanted to find trouble with you, they would need to think about whether it would be worth taking on the whole of the Herbalist Society."
After he finished speaking, Ben's wrist moved slightly, and the coffee cup flew toward Kevin at lightning speed. As the saying goes, an expert will know when he strikes. Jordan and Justin Black's bodies suddenly tensed up and they were ready to strike at any time. However, when the coffee cup flew in front of Kevin, it was suddenly stopped by an invisible force. It kept spinning in the air and the coffee cup trembled violently. Suddenly, Kevin slapped the table with force. At that moment, the coffee cup flew back and disintegrated in front of Ben Dumas. The steaming hot coffee splashed in all directions. Some of it splattered Ben's shirt, but he didn't seem to care.
Mr. Williams, don't refuse this deal. I can assure you that this is your best chance," Ben said forcefully as he suddenly stood up from his chair and shouted.
"I'm not one to forfeit and to concede defeat," Kevin said fearlessly. "Why don't you take a look at where you are? This is Chicago, not Washington, D.C. I think you may have come to the wrong place." Ben's expression gradually became hard and cold. He narrowed his eyes and stared at Kevin.
"This is your last chance. Let me give you a piece of advice. After all, there aren't many opportunities in one's life that can change one's fate."
Ben Dumas put one hand behind his back and said disdainfully with his head raised high. Watching this exchange, Jordan and Justin Black couldn't help but clench their fists, wanting to teach this man a good lesson. "I'll give you one last chance. Hand over my wife right now. If you're willing to do that, perhaps I'll leave you with a fully intact corpse," Kevin replied fearlessly.
"It seems like you really don't know how to appreciate a favor. In that case, don't blame me,"
Ben said as a brilliant white light flashed across his eyes as he forcefully clapped his hands. When the bright light subsided, 30 Herbalist Society members suddenly appeared and surrounded Kevin and the other two.
"Kevin, are you really unwilling to submit to the Herbalist Society?"
Ben Dumas said, seemingly still willing to hold out some hope in his heart for a peaceful resolution. "The moment you use my wife as a pawn in your scheme, the Herbalist Society and I became like water and fire." Kevin took a deep breath and reached behind his back, pulling out the night dagger. Kevin was beckoned to meet with Ben Dumas of the Herbalist Society, who informed him handing over the power pill formula to the society was a demand he would be ill-advised to refuse. Realizing that Dumas and the Herbalists were behind Lily's kidnapping, Kevin refused and prepared to battle the society soldiers, whom Dumas had brought along in case Kevin needed convincing.
"Kill him,"
Ben Dumas said as he disgustedly shook his head twice. The members of the Herbalist Society immediately rushed toward Kevin with their weapons drawn. 30 against 1 would barely cause the Herbalist soldiers to break a sweat. Frozen seal technique. A pale blue light streamed out of Kevin's body, covering all the members of the Herbalist Society with his spiritual energy in an instant. "What is that?" Jordan Black looked at Kevin with a frightened expression. Although Justin Black didn't say anything, he was just as stunned as Jordan by Kevin's energy force. At the moment, it was as if all the members of the Herbalist Society had lost their ability to control their muscles and pursue the battle. Kevin's spiritual energy was so powerful that all of them were seemingly sealed by it and frozen on the spot. At the same time, Ben Dumas sensed that something was wrong when the blue light flashed on his men. He quickly stepped back and pulled away from Kevin, then gulped hard as he looked at his subordinates, who were helplessly stuck in their tracks and standing like statues. While Kevin's face had been drained due to the amount of spiritual energy that he was using, his overall mental state was still sharp. With this, he then proceeded to swiftly kill all of Ben Dumas's subordinates in an instant with their swords. "Mr. Dumas, can we have a good talk now?" Kevin casually walked among the corpses and looked at Ben Dumas, whose eyes widened upon witnessing this horrific scene.
How did you do that?"
Ben asked in disbelief. He himself was considered to be one of the top geniuses among the Herbalist Society's younger generation, but he had never seen anyone like Kevin, who could instantly kill 30 experts within seconds. How powerful was this guy? "Where is Lily?" Kevin asked coldly.
You'll never know."
Ben tried his best to maintain his composure as he kept telling himself that he must not panic. After all, he could still use Lily as a trump card to subdue Kevin and protect himself. And he had Kevin's mother-in-law, Dorothy, as a backup. Surely Kevin wouldn't let his wife and his mother-in-law die because of his obstinance. "It seems like I'll have to make you feel a little bit of pain before you can answer me honestly." Kevin threatened as he revealed an extremely mischievous smile. A second later, Kevin appeared in front of Ben Dumas. He then forcefully pressed his left hand on Ben's chest, sending a considerable amount of spiritual energy from the tip of his fingers. Once it entered Ben's body, he felt as if Kevin's spiritual energy had wrapped around his entire heart. With that, Kevin gave Ben Dumas a light shove, which sent him flying several feet away like a ragdoll. He then fell to the ground with a heavy thud, forcing him to spit out a mouthful of blood. Ben wasn't able to finish his sentence as a hint of panic suddenly appeared on his face. He was shocked to find that he could no longer control the spiritual energy inside his body. Don't try to forcefully activate your spiritual energy, otherwise it'll cause your heart to explode, which I would imagine isn't such a pleasurable thing to experience. Kevin feigned an innocent smile. However, in Ben Dumas's eyes, Kevin's smile was clearly filled with an extremely ominous and devious aura. I'm asking you this one last time, so if you want to live, be smart and don't force me to use any further violence on you. Where the hell is Lily? Kevin slowly approached him step by step. Ben Dumas crawled backward on the ground with both his hands and feet.
Kevin, I'm warning you, if you hurt me, you'll never be able to see your wife ever again.
This time, Kevin didn't make a loud noise. He casually kept the night dagger in his pocket and grabbed Ben's ankle. His palm then suddenly exerted so much force that it crushed his ankle bone. Ugh! Ben let out a heart-wrenching cry as his face trembled uncontrollably from pain so extreme that he thought it would be impossible to overcome it. That's all you have to say? It seems the pain that I've inflicted upon you is still not enough. A cold light flashed across Kevin's eyes as he slapped Ben Dumas's knee. A cracking sound was heard, and Ben's entire face twisted gruesomely as he struggled to break free from Kevin's restraints like a mad dog.
Damn it, you bastard!
Ben couldn't help but curse and shriek from the agony. Human bones are pretty hard to break, but it's a good thing that I've always liked to test their limits. Kevin tightly grabbed his ankle and added, Don't worry, I shall play with you slowly. This is simply just the beginning. I'll break all the bones in your legs first, and then I plan to move on to your ribs. After that, I'll chop off your fingers and knock out your teeth one by one. If you can still resist my torture and last until the end without talking, then I'll respect you for being a damn tough man. But if Kevin was just getting started, how much more could he endure? The heart-wrenching pain had made him grit his teeth so much that he felt that he could die at any moment. Just then, Kevin fiercely stomped on Ben Dumas's other ankle. This time he didn't let out any painful cries. Instead, he instantly fainted. You're not getting away that easily. Kevin quickly stretched out his left hand and grabbed one of Ben's ribs. He then pulled on it viciously and broke it in order to force him to wake up from a state of unconsciousness. This worked like a charm, as Ben Dumas immediately screamed at the top of his lungs in horror when his rib snapped.
In that old wooden shed over there.
Ben's voice was trembling as he pointed to where he had been keeping Lily. At the moment, Ben Dumas really couldn't hold it anymore as he felt that every inch of his being was in extreme pain. Throughout his whole life, he had never thought that living could be so miserable. For the first time, he thought that death would actually be a luxury. Kevin let out a cold snort once again. Before Ben could say anything more, he swiftly knocked him out with a single strike. Then he threw him onto the ground as if he was throwing away a piece of trash. When they saw this, Jordan and Justin Black looked at each other at the same time with faces filled with fear. To them, killing was just an everyday occurrence, but the way that Kevin made sure to make him slowly suffer to get what he wanted seemed much more sinister. Kevin's grail to save Lily at any cost had turned him into a ruthless attacker of his enemies. With Ben Dumas already handily defeated, Kevin turned around and walked toward the wooden shed. The ground inside the wooden shed was sprinkled with some dry grass. When Kevin saw Lily, she was still wearing her hospital gown and lying quietly on the ground like a sleeping beauty beside Dorothy, who was also unconscious at the moment. Seeing that she was safe and sound, Kevin finally let out a deep sigh of relief. He then carried her on his back and instructed Jordan and Justin Black to pick up Dorothy as they quickly made their way to the Salix Leaf Complex. After giving Lily the medicinal pill that he had refined from the Life Essence flower, Kevin waited patiently by her bedside. Roughly 3 hours had passed when Lily, who had been in a coma for so long, slowly opened her eyes. As soon as she regained her senses and saw Kevin, she softly called out, "Kevin." "Lily, it's so great to see that you're finally awake. I can't believe it. I've missed you so much." Kevin held Lily's hand tightly. He was so excited that he was overcome by emotion. As such, tears couldn't help but flow out of his eyes. "Darling, why are you crying?" Lily asked weakly. "Is there something wrong? I've never seen you like this." "These aren't tears of sadness. I'm just so happy to see you finally wake up from your coma." Kevin wiped away the tears on his face. He was so happy right now that he looked like an innocent child. "How long was I asleep for?" Lily tried to sit up on the bed but didn't have enough energy to do so. "It wasn't too long, Lily. Don't worry about that for now. Just rest here in bed. I'll make some soup for you to help you regain your strength." Kevin stood up excitedly and quickly ran downstairs. However, when he arrived in the kitchen, he found that there was nothing to cook in the fridge or in the pantry. Per usual, he called Adriana Wright and asked her to arrange for someone to send some groceries over immediately. At the same time, in the temporary headquarters of the Myriads in the suburbs of Chicago, Brett Stewart was sitting in the courtyard, leisurely drinking a cup of coffee. Just then, Roger Knott hurriedly ran over. He respectfully lowered his head to him before continuing. "Supreme Commander, something has happened. I just received news that the group of people from the Herbalist Society was killed earlier this evening." Brett Stewart's hand trembled when he heard this, creating ripples in his coffee cup. "Those people weren't weak at all. Who killed them?" he asked. "We haven't found out yet, but there's another thing. An ancient tomb was discovered within the Rocky Mountains. According to rumors, therein lies an ancient artifact, and whoever wields it shall have access to unlimited strength. All the major powers have already heard the news and made their moves. Both the Alliance and the Morris family have sent their men over as well," Roger reported hastily. All knew that there could be a war brewing to secure possession of such a rare and valuable artifact. Ben Dumas and his herbalists' acolytes were unprepared for the power of Kevin's energy field. They, despite outnumbering Kevin 30-1, were easily bested as Kevin not only refused to hand over the power pill formula, but forced Dumas to reveal where Lily was being held captive. After rescuing her, Kevin also administered his new pill which, at long last, revived Lily from her coma. At the same time, in the temporary headquarters of the Myriads in Chicago, Roger Knott hurriedly informed Brett Stewart about the slaughter of the group of people from the Herbalist Society. Not knowing who was behind this, Roger moved on to also report the discovery of the ancient tomb within the Rocky Mountains, where an ancient artifact with the power to unlock unlimited strength was rumored to be located. As such, all the major powers, as well as the Alliance and the Morris family, had already made moves to go there. "An ancient artifact?" Brent Stewart frowned slightly and gestured for Roger Knott to sit down with him first. "According to legend, this continent has a total of 7 divine weapons. 2 of them are in the possession of the government, while the whereabouts of the other 5 divine weapons remain unknown. Could one of those be what everyone is looking for inside that ancient tomb? But why did such a rumor suddenly spread now after so many years of this fact being a mystery?" Roger Knott slightly lowered his head and replied, I don't know much about it either. It could be just a baseless rumor, but perhaps there could also be a deeper reason and some evidence behind the sudden interest that we don't know of.
Is there any news about Kevin and Dalton?
Brett suddenly thought of them and asked. Both of them have recently returned to Chicago and are now back at their respective homes, Roger informed him, then immediately asked, Supreme Commander, why did you suddenly ask this question? Don't tell me you want them to make a trip to the Rocky Mountains.
Who said that?
Don't put words in my mouth. Brett snorted. It annoyed him when one of his underlings attempted to lead the conversation.
That being said, I actually want to go there with them.
On the highest floor of the Herbalist Society's headquarters in Washington, D.C., a man who looked to be in his 30s suddenly smashed the large table with his palm.
How arrogant and ignorant of that kid. Kevin actually dared to kill several members of the Herbalist Society. He deserves to die for his crimes,
the man roared furiously. Ever since the Herbalist Society was formed, its powers and influence were such that no one would dare to disrespect the members or stand in the way of their activities in such a brazen manner. Not even key figures from the federal government or leading members of the major powers would be so bold and so foolish. However, the group of people who were sent to Chicago this afternoon were suddenly slaughtered, and it was obvious that they had been killed by an evil man. Given this, in the entire city, only Kevin Williams had the ability and courage to do so. Under the angry roar of their leader, 4 or 5 senior members of the Herbalist Society immediately lowered their heads, not daring to meet his gaze, refute his authority, or challenge what he had just said.
Chairman, please calm down. For his arrogance, Kevin should definitely be eliminated as soon as possible. Otherwise, others will take note that there is no one in the Herbalist Society who can stop him, one of them said, only adding fuel to the fire.
Chairman, I'm willing to personally make a trip to Chicago. If you send me, I shall definitely retrieve Kevin's head and all the pill formulas that he has for you, another offered. The Herbalist Society's chairman sat down in his armchair angrily, and a deep look could be seen in his fierce eyes. Finally, he took a few deep breaths to calm down the rage in his heart. Then he remarked in a flat tone,
That kid isn't worth mentioning. The most important thing right now is to get the legendary divine weapon in the ancient tomb.
The chairman then turned to one of the men.
Bring some men with you. Remember to bring the weapon back to me. As long as we have the divine weapon in our possession, we'll definitely be able to compete with the Morris family's strength.
Since the Herbalist Society's inception, the organization had gained a huge amount of power and resources from refining and selling pills. But although the Herbalist Society had gained a reputation for its members' herbalism skills, and the wealth it had accumulated over the years could practically rival an entire country's own riches, it didn't really have anything that could be described as its one defining treasure. Thus, the power of an ancient divine weapon was simply too great for the chairman to ignore. As such, when he received the news from the ancient tomb, the first thing that the chairman thought of wasn't how to deal with Kevin, but how to obtain the powerful weapon. Back in the Salix Leaf complex, Lily and Kevin were leaning against each other at the dining table. They were chatting and laughing sweetly, but this kind of situation often didn't last long at home, especially with Dorothy around. Tonight was no exception. Kevin could hear Dorothy's footsteps nearing, and he knew his happy reunion with a revived Lily was about to be shattered by his mother-in-law's venomous insults.
"Lily, what are you doing?"
Dorothy quickly walked down to the kitchen from upstairs. Dorothy hated nothing more than seeing Lily actually enjoying Kevin's company, even if he had saved both of their lives. Half an hour ago, Kevin had already explained the situation to both of them and promised that nothing similar would ever happen again. When they heard this, Lily couldn't care less about his ownership of the Blue Water Export Company or the reason why they were kidnapped. Dorothy, though, wasn't an easy person to deal with, even if she did owe her life to Kevin. "Mom, why are you still angry? I'm the one who got hospitalized, and my accident doesn't have much to do with Kevin," Lily looked at her mother indifferently. I don't care if that had anything to do with him or not. But if it wasn't because of him, why would he have been taken away? He just told us that. Dorothy stared at Kevin with an unfriendly gaze. The more she spoke, but if it wasn't because of him, why would we have been taken away? He just told us that. Dorothy stared at Kevin with an unfriendly gaze. The more she spoke, the stronger the resentment in her heart became. There's one more thing you must know about your useless husband. Back when you were unconscious, Kevin was barely even by your bedside at all. Instead, he spent his days cheating on you behind your back with that young woman from the Anderson family. He even had that woman watch over you before I found out about your accident. What? Lily was stunned and turned her back to look at Kevin with pleading eyes. The original sweetness in her face had instantly disappeared. Is what my mom just said true? Lily, listen to me. Your mom has got it all wrong. Let me explain what really happened to you. Kevin sighed and scratched his head, annoyed that he still had to deal with this. He had almost forgotten about the confrontation that he had had with Dorothy and Phoebe after such a long time, and he didn't expect that Dorothy would mention it as soon as Lily woke up. Still, knowing that he did nothing wrong and that Dorothy was just making all these assumptions, he had nothing to worry about, right? But at the same time, he knew that Dorothy wasn't going to accept anything that he said and would do everything to insist on her version of the story to Lily out of pure spite and hatred. Moreover, how would he explain his absence to Lily? The war against the Pinnacle and all the other matters that he had to deal with would take more than an entire day to explain. And even before considering all that, how would Lily react to all of this? Was she even prepared to hear the whole truth regarding Kevin's identity? Kevin was, in short, in a bind. What's there to explain? Kevin, be a man and own up to your mistake. Do you still dare to deny that you've been having an affair outside of your marriage? Dorothy crossed her arms in front of her chest and sneered at him. Lily has been so good to you. Even when you were a useless nobody, she never thought about leaving you despite all the warning signs that I pointed out to her over the years. But in the end, this is how you treat her? You're disgusting. If it was anyone else who was a big company CEO as their son-in-law, they wouldn't even dare to speak ill of him. In fact, they would probably shower Kevin with constant praise any chance that they had. Dorothy would probably be the last person in the world to see Kevin's skills and achievements. But in Dorothy's heart, Kevin had always been trash. He was nothing but a complete beggar and a good-for-nothing bum who she could order around and bully without any regard for his feelings. And this kind of mentality had already been deeply rooted in every fiber of her being. It was probably useless to try and change her mind about him. However, the recent turn of events shocked Dorothy. Having relied upon them all these years, the destruction of the Jones family had caused her to lose all of her wealth and status. At the same time, Kevin's own reputation and financial well-being had suddenly climbed again. Not only had he become the head of a massive company, but he had also established connections with many influential figures. In the blink of an eye, the dynamic between the two of them had completely reversed. With Kevin now on top and her at the bottom, how could Dorothy accept this new reality? After all, she knew better than anyone how she had treated Kevin back then, and even Dorothy could admit in her heart that she had made accusations against Kevin that he didn't deserve. With the tables turned, would Kevin take revenge? Dorothy had to tread carefully. The happiness of Lily's revival and her reunion with Kevin was short-lived because Dorothy set about poisoning her daughter's mind about Kevin's loyalty to her and his activities when Lily was in a coma. Kevin, despite all his powers and skills, knew that grappling with his mother-in-law was the most dangerous battle looming on his horizon. Because of this, Dorothy was afraid that Kevin would treat her the same way and step all over her dignity as revenge. And no matter what, she wasn't willing to let this useless person have his chance to turn the tables on her. On top of this, she was even more jealous of the money in Kevin's hands. As a result, she wanted to do everything she could to tear their marriage apart at all costs, so that she could take all his money for herself. Even without all the facts, she believed that casting doubt in Lily's mind about Kevin and Phoebe Anderson's relationship would be enough for her daughter to demand a divorce herself. That is, unless Kevin was willing to cooperate and hand over everything to her. Seeing that Kevin was still at a loss for what to say to Lily, Dorothy took the opportunity to capitalize on her daughter's vulnerability. "Lily, listen to me," Dorothy said as she looked at Lily, whose eyes were gradually turning red and her face was also filled with disappointment. "Didn't I warn you from the very beginning that Kevin was a piece of trash who didn't deserve you? Look how much he's hurt you now. Haven't you had enough?" Kevin didn't know where to begin, but he tried his best to find the right words to explain things slowly. "Lily, this matter is a long story. First of all, Phoebe Anderson is just a close friend, and I'm eternally grateful to her for risking everything just to save my life. After all, she didn't hesitate to—" "Stop talking!" Lily suddenly covered Kevin's mouth with her hand and tears silently fell from her face. "I don't want to hear about what's going on between you and her, and I don't want to know whether it's true or not right now either. Just give me some space and let me be alone for a while." Lily got up in a daze and slowly walked upstairs. She needed both to be away from Kevin while she considered what might be the truth about his relationship with Phoebe, and to be away from her mother, who often threw insults and accusations at Kevin so quickly that Lily couldn't think straight. She'd found that it was easier to leave the room than to diffuse the situation with more yelling. Dorothy revealed a cruel smile at the corner of her mouth as she said in a whisper, "Did you see that, Kevin? Even if you're now very rich, if you still want to stay by Lily's side in the future, you must listen to me and give me everything that I want. Otherwise, I'll definitely convince my daughter to divorce you." Dorothy added, "That being said, you know your place in this family. What your position was in the past will not change at all now. Therefore, you should hand everything you own over to Lily and me, including the Williams Company and all your assets. And you had better not be hiding anything." Dorothy's heart was filled with joy when she said this. As long as she could make Kevin listen to her, wouldn't she have endless wealth? However, no matter how many words came out of her mouth, Kevin didn't seem to hear a single one. He just sat quietly in the chair and lowered his head, thinking about something. "Hey, why aren't you looking at me? I'm talking to you about how you can still save your marriage. Do you hear me?" Dorothy frowned slightly as she impatiently walked over to Kevin and kicked the leg of his chair. "Tomorrow morning, go to the bank as soon as it opens and transfer all of your money to me. Then transfer all of your assets to either my name or Lily's. No ifs, ands, or buts." Dorothy continued, "If you want to remain married to Lily, these are my conditions. Otherwise, I can promise you that you will never see my daughter again. Do you hear me clearly?" Dorothy tried to provoke a response from him as she lightly poked his forehead with her finger. At the moment, she already seemed to have seen the comfortable and luxurious future ahead of her. However, Kevin didn't want to bother with her antics. He simply got up and prepared to walk out of the room. "Where are you going? I'm not done talking to you." Dorothy quickly grabbed his shoulder and called him out in a harsh tone. "If you fail to comply with any of my conditions, be careful of what—" "Enough!" Kevin forcefully shook Dorothy's hand away and slowly turned around to stare at her. He could no longer hide the fact that he was seething with anger at her at the moment, as his eyes faintly revealed a scornful look. Seeing him like this, Dorothy suddenly felt a strong fear in her heart. After taking a few steps back to create some distance between them, it seemed that her previous arrogance had disappeared completely as she stammered. What do you want? This is my home. You better not mess around." "You're right. This is your home. And up until now, the only reason that I put up with your attitude is because you're Lily's mother." Kevin forcefully slammed his hands on the dining table, causing it to instantly break in half. "I don't care what you did to me in the past, but moving forward, You are no longer allowed to interfere in matters between Lily and me. If you agree to leave us in peace for the rest of your life, I promise not to treat you badly. But if you still dare to talk nonsense, I can't guarantee that anyone will save you in the future if something were to happen to you." The loud commotion in Kevin's cold words caused Dorothy's face to instantly drain color. Deep down, while Kevin was ruthless enough to kill powerful experts and other evildoers who dared to offend him and his loved ones, he had no intentions at all of actually hurting Dorothy. No matter what, she was still his wife's mother, which was a hard reality to swallow. Still, his frustrations with her had already reached a boiling point, and he wanted her to stay as far away from him and Lily as possible. After all, it hadn't been easy for him to ease Lily's concerns about their marriage, given that he was caught up in several matters that had, admittedly, caused him to have to leave Lily's hospital bedside more than he liked. Moreover, with her life hanging in the balance, he barely managed to get the life essence spirit flower back from the ancient tomb in order to save her. And now that he had just cured Lily, they didn't even have 2 hours to cherish each other's company before things were completely ruined by Dorothy, who seemingly had no regard for anyone's happiness other than her own. But at the end of the day, Dorothy was his mother-in-law, and she was Lily's last living family member. So no matter how much he despised Dorothy, Kevin really couldn't bear to see Lily sad again. Could the two of them ever see eye to eye for her sake? After letting out a cold snort, Kevin left the Salix Leaf Complex without looking back. Right now, there was nothing that he could do other than wait for Lily's anger to subside before coming back and explaining his side of the story. Walking quietly along the streets of Chicago, Kevin looked at the bustling city before him, watching all the cars move through the streets and couples happily sipping on some red wine while having dinner. His heart was overcome by emotion for a moment. Why do I have to live such a tiring and miserable existence? With my current wealth, even if I have nothing to do all day long, I would have enough money to enjoy myself for several lifetimes. If I decide to leave the realm of the great powers altogether, will it be just another footnote in my epitaph when the time comes? Kevin thought to himself. After walking the streets of the city for some time, his phone suddenly vibrated. This immediately pulled Kevin back to his senses as Dalton Steele's name came up on the caller ID. "What's up, Dalton?" Kevin asked faintly.
"Kevin, where the hell did you go? I sent you so many messages earlier, but you didn't reply to any of them. What happened to you?"
Dalton shouted loudly. "Sorry, I didn't notice my phone until just now. Anyway, why are you so anxious? Did something bad happen?" Kevin asked as he scratched his chin in confusion.
"Nothing much. It's just that the two old men miss you. They want you to return to the Healing Arts School immediately. But since they had no way of knowing your whereabouts, they left the matter of finding you to me," Dalton explained slowly. "Tell me where you are. I'll meet up with you there so that we can go to the Healing Arts School together." Kevin knew that it wasn't just that Wayne Ford and Harley Shepard missed seeing his face. They surely had an important mission to discuss with him.